Hold your horses there, cowboy.
I
You
know.
haven't told
Yeah,
your origin story yet.
yeah.
So
You have like actual like encounters almost, don't you?
Yeah, yeah, no, you're the only one out of us that has like actual legitimate experience with Squatch.
so what's so wild about that? And I was going to leave that until the end so we can go ahead and get into encounter stories right after the what how we got into it kind of thing, because mine's kind of got a sordid history with this individual, and it took me years to even register what had happened, like what possibly that thing could have been. It was a part of my life where I was kind of shutting memories and past things out anyway. So when this kind of came back, it was kind of like, whoa, wait a second
Yeah,
here. And I had a real moment, and like me and my parents came in and talked together. But I'll go ahead and start from the beginning.
yeah.
I grew up around the time of Monster Quest. Okay,
Hell
so
yeah, that was my jam. Absolutely
same.
garbage show. Still loved it anyways.
But it introduced a lot of these creatures and other things from folklore into the general scape. Turns out, like, half of their episodes are about Bigfoot anyway. So I
Yeah.
think it's a progenitor to finding Bigfoot, and that's how I got into it. Now, me being a kid, I had a wildly active imagination. Like, I would run out into the woods anyway as a kid with like sticks and like like a garbage can on my arm, pretending I'm Link from Legend of Zelda.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm trying to find a cave or something. And that's another thing, because that's kind of a way I got into something a little bit later. But I was always in the woods. I had been pretty much half and half in the woods or on the internet growing up as a kid. And listening to these Bigfoot encounters, and I grew up in Appalachia basically, and my family still lives in that area, and knowing those woods, knowing the type of wildlife that are in those woods, knowing how derelict it can get out there. I don't know,
Yeah.
my 5-year-old brain was like, I think it can happen. Okay. And there were already a lot of wild things happening in our little holler, as we called it. Like, in our local area, like valleys or hollers, because you can holler across them and hear your neighbor.
Well, no, a holler is like a small valley.
Mm-hmm.
Because like there's a difference between like a valley and like a holler. Because like a holler, like that's you could walk from one side of a holler to another one and then go up the other hill, right? A
Yeah, it's
valley,
not too bad.
that's yeah.
So, we lived on one that was notorious for meth production. Okay, and there were already crazy neighbors happening all the time, things happening at night all the time, and like my parents always kind of just taught us how to survive and how to, well, we learned how to shoot at a young age, to be fair, in order to defend yourself if something happened, because crazy neighbors or wildlife outside, because we had reported mountain lions in the area, because our area had a lot of big cat refuges that went out of business during the 80s, and they just let them go before the feds came in and hit them with federal crime. So they were already like, okay, just in case random cougar is out here, he needs to know how to use a gun and carry it at night. Okay? So we were already kind of let onto the fact that, yeah, some wild things can happen. And whenever I hear about this Bigfoot as a kid, oh my God, I got paranoid. Not even gonna lie to you. And not a whole lot of what happened to me when I was growing up actually registered at the time as potential Bigfoot activity. Like I said, until like probably last year or year before, whenever we went down the rabbit hole and started really getting into stuff. And the first encounter I had was actually one of those things where I didn't even really remember it too well until we heard the Umatilla Reservation video. Now, for anybody who's not familiar with that, it's a reservation up in the Northwest, and it's a video where a man in the middle of the night is recording on his cell phone, and he's like, listen to this. And it sounds like, I don't know, it's some like, it sounds apish, but almost sounds like it's mimicking hyenas or dogs.
There's
It's
some kind of vocalizations, and they are just echoing all
crazy.
across the landscape, and you can hear these things very clearly. And it's like 3 or 4 different recordings of it, and I've never heard anything else like it. It's genuinely like, what is that?
Exactly. And when I heard it for the first
mm-hmm.
time, it brought me back almost to where I was 7 or 8 years old. And it was the middle of the night, probably 11 o'clock. All of us are out, like, I wouldn't say out, but like either on the porch or watching TV inside, watching a movie on ABC usually. And suddenly, like, I'd say a good 4 or 5 miles away, across the, not across just the holler, but across the highway 2 miles out in that section of the lake that I live near, started hearing what could be considered coyote calls. It sounded like yipping, but the problem was it was moving fast, and whatever it was yipping at a rate of probably a dozen times every 4 seconds, so like 3 times a second probably. And it was moving quick across the highway and up into the woods at like 11:30 midnight. Okay. Now, my dad and I were outside just kind of, enjoying enjoying the night and everything. It was really beautiful that night, Fireflies were really common back then. I can imagine they were probably out that time of year. I think it was October, maybe November. And something didn't exactly set well with my dad. Like, I thought it was just coyotes, because that's what they sounded like to me. And we were used to spotlighting them, shooting them, because we didn't want them around the chickens, we didn't want them around the horses, all that kind of stuff. And there's older people living across the hill that have wildlife. We're trying to keep general predators like that down. And what got me was I was used to going and getting the spotlight, and he was about to go get the 30-06, and you know what I mean? And instead, he looks at me and he goes, bring the dogs inside. And we had outside dogs that were never allowed inside. And at that point, he goes out with his 357 and gets the horses and get them in the barn. Now, that requires him to get them from outside in the pasture into the the side yard and into the barn, which was not really connected to our pastures at the time. The problem was we don't really have a good sight line of the pastures, but we do the barn. And he gets back inside, and my mom's kind of like, oh, what's happening? And he just kind of looks at her and goes, coyotes. And at that point, they had been getting louder and louder and louder, but they were very loud. I mean, louder than any coyote I've ever heard in my life. Now, like, coming to think about it a year ago, like, listening to coyote calls in packs, a couple of things were different. Decibels, very loud. Louder than coyotes that I've ever heard of. B, the frequency of the call. Like, coyotes, even in packs, don't continuously call to each other. They do it very seldomly, maybe once every 2, 3, 5 minutes, in order to make sure that everybody knows where they're at. But they're still trying to hunt, so they're not trying to be very loud. So why would they be calling so loudly and so rapidly? And I mean, my parents were visibly freaked out. My dad had the hunting rifle, and he was out looking dead at the barn. And my mom took us downstairs, had a gun, everything. I was surprised as a kid, because like I said, if it was coyotes, we'd be out there shooting them.
Yeah.
So I go and I talk to him about it, and my mom was like, yeah, We didn't know what that was, but we knew that wasn't coyotes. And that was kind of wild to me because I thought it was an active imagination thing as a child, you know?
But nope, it was a real incident.
And it was verified by my parents. And my mom's kind of like me. She's apt to believe things, but my dad's a very hardline thinker, and he grew up out in the woods himself, and he said he straight up couldn't explain what it was. And later, there was an incident that happened after we had moved out that happened to them that I'll get to after a while. But my second encounter-ish, it wasn't really a visual thing, but it was definitely weird activity, was over at my biological father's place, like a couple of counties over. Little beknownst to me at the time was a Bigfoot hotspot area. And I was running around those woods like nothing was a problem, okay? Just like I owned the place. Like traveling between neighbors' places, I was walking like miles a day out in the woods with my dog, no problem. We were setting up secret bases for other, like, to go and like play war with other kids in the neighborhood, everything like that. And well, one day I was up and I was wanting to scout up above the ridge line because like one of the parts of the holler was kind of adjacent to a giant ridge with a giant rock face that had like a deer line, and coyotes would run it too, but a general game trail was running the edge of the holler. Now, I always got a weird feeling about that place, but it never really dawned on me. But that would be a perfect predator observation area. And I went up over the hill, and we used to have like little bases carved and placed with like metal sheets along the ridge line and everything to kind of make like old style Navajo or Native American style settlements built into the cliffside and stuff. It was really cool. But me and my dog had went up over the cliffside, and she was a old mutt that we think had coyote in her. And she was very savvy, very smart dog. And she generally would just chill behind me, not be pretty content with herself. But this time it was different. Like, she was ahead of me. She was alert. She was scouting around. She was keeping an eye on me. And I had just this uneasy feeling. Like I was being watched. And normally I don't have that uneasy feeling when I'm running around those woods. Especially as a kid, because I was owning the thing. You know what I mean? Like, those were my woods. Okay? And, I mean, obviously, folly of a child to think when he's like 9-10 years old that he owns anything out in the woods, but that was my natural haunt.
No, kids go like, I play here all the time, this is my place. That's just the thing kids do.
So the dog was acting wild, like ultra alert, and we had come up to this area where it looked like a house had been built, I would say 20-30 years ago at the time, so it's probably 40 years ago now. And it had been ripped apart. I mean, down there were just broken 2x4s and siding all over the place, and it looked like things had been smashed, okay? Like, just beat to shit. And my dog was not having it. Not having me being there. Like, she went from being like 15-20 feet away from me to being like 2 feet away from me, and kind of not happy. And so at that point, like, I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, I don't know if I'm dumb enough to stay around here. And I had backtracked it out of the woods, back down into the house. And my dog never got in front of me at that point. She was always behind me, keeping an ear and even looking back into the woods. Now, like, there's a lot of stories that can corroborate that Bigfoot do not like dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Either they will hunt them, they will attack them, or dogs are very keen at noticing that they are there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it was one of those things that I can't explain that as a Bigfoot. It could have easily just been a sketchy dude out in the woods. But the thing that really got me was there were talks and legends of Ape Canyon and other big time ish modern encounter stories where if you were to do something aggressive to these things and you went back to your house and it was maybe a mile or two away and you walked back to your house, they know where that house is now and they're
Mm-hmm.
coming. Because another big part of Bigfoot that people might not understand is while it's considered a solitary creature, that's probably the least accurate part of Bigfoot research. Is that if you see one, there's generally two, maybe three in the area. That's something
Mm-hmm.
that multiple different research groups have corroborated over the years.
I
But,
believe they're referred to as troops generally,
mm-hmm,
and um, generally it's believed they roam an area of about what was it? I was literally just looking at the page of it. Hang on. So once again, it's KoR After Hours. I don't have my notes,
yeah, right? Give me one
so
sec.
um, so generally, so this is going off of the Uh, okay, so this is all hypothesis. If a troop of 4 Bigfoot need a home range comparable to a grizzly bear's, because a grizzly bear is an animal we have in North American nature that's closest to it in terms of size and what it would need to eat and diet and stuff like that. Grizzly bears roam roughly about 160 square miles of territory.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's just for 4 Bigfoots. That's a troop. Again, this is a hypothesis. There's nothing proving it. We know that they typically do have troops, but we don't know how far they roam. So,
It seems as though, according to some groups, that there are nomadic tribes of them, and there are more home-based tribes, depending on the region. Now, that all kind of ties into a lot of similarities they have to other great apes, including gorillas and chimpanzees. Mostly just because chimpanzees are nomadic to an extent. If they really feel like they have a territorial grasp on the area and it has enough food, they'll settle down. But generally, chimpanzees wander, while gorillas will wander time to time where food is prevalent, but when they do set up, they set up.
mm-hmm.
Now, what's interesting is the gorilla was considered a cryptid in North Africa until it was discovered less than 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.